everyone's time, but hello and thank you so much for coming tonight to Riding the Waves with Maria Patriquin. We're so excited to have her here tonight, and all of you. We know it's so beautiful outside and Mondays are tough after the weekend. Just a few housekeeping rules. Maria has set up her presentation that there will be points during her presentation where there could be an opportunity for a question, but more so, and that'll be about half an hour, but more so the discussion will take place afterwards. But feel free to ask a question at that point in her presentation, or if you don't feel comfortable, you can just private message me in the chat and I can ask the question for you. Maria received her honors degree from Dalhousie, where she studied theory of mind. She went on to study medicine at McMaster University, which was the first medical school in North America to embrace practice-based learning with a deep emphasis on a biopsychosocial approach to patient-centered care. She received a Women's Health Fellowship from the University of Toronto's Women's College Hospital. Maria practiced as a family physician for 23 years and is the founder of Living Well Integrative Health Center, a space where patients and providers could feel at home physically, emotionally, and professionally. She stands by her mission, which is for people's experiences of healthcare, both as providers and patients, to become positive and humanizing. Lastly, and I feel most importantly, Maria is an incredible mother of three to three beautiful children, Kai, Sasha, and Anastasia. If you were to look at Maria's Facebook feed, it's family, it's love, it's her children. It's wonderful. I don't know how she does it all, but we are very fortunate to have her here tonight. And without further ado, I present to you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Fabiola. That was funny, actually. It's hard to make me blush, but I did actually just blush when you talked about the Facebook feed. So
I love it. I love
no comments from the peanut gallery there, because I did see my parents like first log on. So anyway, yeah. Anyway, I'm really accustomed to doing academic talks as opposed to sort of more casual talks like this. So I really look forward to tonight and just to having some interaction, which is great. So because there's a few of you, you'll have to fill up the space, just so you know. Otherwise, or yell it, like just, get your kids in, whatever. Anyway, yeah, I thank you very much for coming and for attending and for asking me to give this talk, Fabiola, as well. I think it's a really important thing to do. And obviously, as my area of expertise is stress and burnout. And I think that's endemic of sorts at this time, along with the pandemic. I think it's a great topic for us. However, we'll not draw a large audience during a sunny day, so that's okay with me. So we're recording, just so everybody knows. If you don't want to be recorded, you can just turn off your camera and as well as your volume if you like, or your voice. So I always begin with my disclosures here. And sorry, I'm just going to advance through there. Can you guys see those slides?
No, not yet, Maria.
Oh, you can't see them yet? Okay. This is great. You have to press screen share. Forgive me. Yeah, there you go. Okay, we're good now. Okay, I think we're good now. All right, can everybody see those? We're good. Okay, phew. Okay, there we are. My sincere apologies there. So I just usually begin with my disclosures, and I'll do that anyway. And of course, that's more in academia that we need to do that, but I'll just draw your attention to the very last part here, which perhaps my greatest bias is really that I'm a self-diagnosed pathological optimist, for those of you that know me. And again, my parents aren't allowed to say anything in this session. But it's true. Like I do have quite a tendency towards optimism, but I think that that's a healthier way to kind of approach it. And perhaps what's helped sustain one area of specialty in stress and burnout as well too. So I guess we would just begin by just saying, okay, well, what does it mean to be healthy and well? What makes you feel well? And we can go through lots of definitions and things like that, but if you guys would like to yell out or chat out what makes you feel well, that would be great. So I feel well when okay, that's okay. I'm used to filling space. People feel awkward, but if there's anyone that wants to talk, you're welcome to.
I feel,
I was just gonna
oh,
say, oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say,
Nope.
I feel well when I'm well, when I've had lots of sleep and I can focus on the task, pleasurable or sometimes not.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was just going to say I feel well with regards to nutrition. When I've been eating healthy, I can feel the difference as opposed to when it's pandemic mode and you're choosing those not so healthy options as well. You just, physically, and it strikes you emotionally too, right? You just don't feel like yourself.
Absolutely. I feel well when I get outdoor time. I feel well when I get to see my kids more and of the waking hours of the day, more of that than my work hours. Yeah. So I think like the most important thing is obviously we all know what sort of things help us feel well. We never really need that kind of instruction. And I think, most importantly as well too, is that wellness isn't defined by the absence of illness. Like we are able to live within the constraints, the confines of being human, which means that we do get ill, we do get stressed, and we can still be well in the face of all of that as well too. So I won't go through formal definitions. You're always welcome to read them. I think it's important to just think about stress a little bit, because the reality is that we stress because we're healthy, right? It means something. And in fact, we don't grow and develop in the healthiest of ways, emotionally, cognitively, or physically, unless we have stress. And that's why it's so important to differentiate between the types of stress that we have, right? So if we think of children, if they were not to meet new people or have to try to walk, they don't learn how to do those things, right? So it's the equivalent, and we metaphorically have the equivalent in all stages of our lives, from our early years up into our later years. But there is positive stress, there's tolerable, and there's toxic stress, and there is a big difference between those. So that positive stress is like meeting a new person. Tolerable stress is a serious stress, but it's temporary. And it's usually buffered by the fact that people have supportive relationships around them. Toxic stress is when there's prolonged activation of stress, or in systems or within a person's life, in some facet of their life, in the absence of protective relationships. So as you can see, it's really important that we kind of conceptualize what stress is and understand the difference between it, particularly during the pandemic, because what is a tolerable level of stress has a great potential to move into a toxic realm of stress, particularly because of our need to isolate and to separate from other people too. Lots of times people come to my classes, and sorry, I didn't preemptively tell you this, but I have a family practice as well as a psychotherapy practice, and predominantly work in groups that are focused on mindfulness and stress reduction. Lots of times when people come, they say, but I want to be stressed. It drives me, which of course, yes, of course it does. That's that positive stress we're talking about. And you can see here that we have stress. It's stress, positive stress, that drives us to optimal performance, which is great. However, we live in a culture of stress that far predates the pandemic. And I just left a few little humorous cartoons for you there. And the fact of the matter is that we live in a culture where stress is the norm. Like we've promoted fast foods and sedentary lifestyles and isolation and things that are kind of devoid of meaning. We've got an on-demand culture, and it's kind of contributed to kind of more illness, but as well a kind of a crisis to crisis type coping style within people that actually in the medical system is mirrored, but I think so in many other facets of our lives as well too. This inevitably causes more stress and also contributes to more illness too. High sustained levels of stress lead to burnout, as well as a number of different social issues, emotional issues, cognitive, and of course, mental illness as well too. So I'm saying we have the ability to look at our stress. We're the only species that can think about how we think, and yet we use that so very rarely, you think, that reflective potential. And we're going to reflect way back for a moment and just remember where we've evolved from and why it might be that we're particularly enamored with stress and being high strung, because we evolved from the monkey, not the monkey who ate the banana and then had to sleep in the jungle, but we evolved from that monkey who was like, yeah, good banana, but you know what, I'm going to keep one eye open just like this, just in case there's a tiger around. So there's that kind of hypervigilance, that little sort of edginess, and it's created this kind of, it's a survival mechanism, and that's why we have survived, but a kind of a negativity bias that always sort of keeps us in a somewhat stressed mode. So I kind of think of it sometimes in a bit of a way that it's sort of almost like a vestigial kind of adaptive mechanism, that we don't need it as much anymore, because the problem really is that we get that kind of reaction to things that really shouldn't elicit a fight or flight kind of response. Not everyone will get COVID, but I think what we could probably uniformly agree is that everybody will be is affected by this emotionally, and can also be affected by this mentally as well too. I haven't referenced, sorry, the researcher here, but who's conceptualized these waves of the pandemic. And as you can see, they all kind of cross-sect as well too. And the largest wave, of course, is the fourth wave, which is the psychic wave. It's the one where there's a burden of mental illness, of economic injury, as well as burnout. And so my work predating the pandemic was looking at how we can sort of mitigate the effects of stress and burnout so that we live in a healthier way. We've got one life to live. And here we spend so much of it rushing around trying to meet certain metrics and expectations. I've got a lot of sources of stress in our lives. You're welcome to shout yours out if you'd like to unmute yourself. I've just listed a few. We can put in there too if you haven't gotten your drink from your kid yet, Lindsay. Yes, I just realized the irony of this. I'm drinking milk out of a beer mug, and you do. What are signs of stress, and how do you stress? They're sometimes very obvious how we stress. You know, we can tell from our mood. The issue really becomes when we're in a highly activated state as we are. Sometimes it becomes more difficult to recognize that. I just grabbed this off of something, Facebook or Instagram, but I thought that was hilarious and so very accurate. Like, very expensive to-do listed with deadlines and financials and things in the shower, and then other showers like, oh, what day is it? And if you add me to it, oh, forgot that I put the milk on for the coffee. Yes, I do sleep with a stuffy and my dog, because I do so much work in bed when I'm sneaking, and I can, but I need to support my back by a big stuffy. So got to have some humor behind it. But you know, strange times. I'll remember what I need to do for a patient. I won't necessarily remember to buy toilet paper. Hopefully my kids are not within an earshot. And the reality is, though, is that stress is really bad for us. It's really bad for our bodies. It's really bad for our brains. We know that there are over 30 different chemicals and hormones that are associated with the acute stress response, and that sustained and long-term, it isn't just stress. Just has become like a dirty four-letter word in my language. And that's just because we usually are minimizing the thing that follows it. So people come in, oh, thank God, it wasn't cancer, it's just stress. And yet it's all the same sort of manifestations and symptoms. It's problematic, because what we do know is that that activation of our system long-term causes significant long-term illness. And a majority of the illnesses that we see in epidemic proportions, like heart disease, cancers, diabetes, and all of that relates to different physiological responses that are mounted in the acute response when they're sustained or at toxic levels. Again, the body and the mind are not separate entities. This is one unit. That's just a false conceptualization. When we are stressed, we work from the more primitive part of our brain. Think back to that monkey, that part that's more the fight, flight, or freeze, or faint. This is the more evolved part of our brain that's responsible for memory, executive function, complex problem solving, emotional regulation, and impulse control. So you can see, for obvious reasons, we want this part online, but when we're stressed, it goes offline. Predating the pandemic, our greatest stress might have been, it's to some extent, imagining driving our kids to soccer or hockey. The question is, how do we differentiate our stress now? How do we know when we've entered into survival mode? I know you're questioning the picture, but go ahead. How do you guys know when you're stressed or when you're in survival mode? This is the part where you get to answer to. And then I'll explain the picture.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that picture.
Sugar?
I would say that front part of my brain doesn't work. I cannot do any complex thinking. It's like, don't two people talk to me at the same time? I can't even go, no questions before 10 a.m. You know, I can't multitask at all.
Absolutely.
Quick to be dysregulated.
Maybe say something we don't mean. Right? Have a hard time remembering. Where did I put those keys? Yeah. Or where did I put those keys again and again and again? Yeah. And that's a human thing. And I think that's why normally I have, like, I explain more of the physiology behind it, because when our prefrontal cortex does go online, it's rendered sort of incapable, our brains are rendered incapable of accessing that part of our brain. So it's not like a you issue, Lynn, for having said that. That's what we all do. That's what our brains do. That's what they're meant to do. It signals something. It signals the need for us to respond in a certain way or not to. Okay, I'll explain this picture. This is how I realized in retrospect that I was in survival mode when we first entered the pandemic, because I found my cart on Amazon and I had like 20-kilo bags of chickpeas and like lentils and rice. So it's like, did I think we were going to go into a famine? I know everybody was running for toilet paper. It's like, we need food. But no joke, because life has not gotten less stressful to some extent, at least for me, in the capacity that I function. So I do buy big things. This is a big bag of rice. And I decided I am not going out for groceries this often. And I found like a restaurant size thing of Nutella. I will give tips at the end where you can find these things, but no more fighting in my house over Nutella. So how do we manage and cope with stress? The thing is, we learn early in life how it is that we deal with stress. And typically what we most need in a time of stress, we tend to sacrifice. So what would those be, right? When we are hungry, when we're stressed, do we eat better? Do we sleep more? Do we go for a walk? Call our friends? Take time to relax? Do our exercise class? Boom, out the window, right? What do we typically do that kind of doesn't really serve our stress? We avoid things. We deny that it's happening. Oh, if I just get on top of this, I do more. Any kind of underdoing often happens in this state. What about you guys?
Drink wine.
Yeah, substances. Absolutely. There's that avoidant part, right?
Eat chocolate.
Chocolate.
I
Yeah.
play stupid computer games.
Yeah. We
So I don't have
distract
to do the
ourselves.
work.
Oh yeah. Online shop.
Back to the shop. I'm gonna add online shop, right? So we distract, we kind of divorce our things, we kind of dissociate ourselves or detach ourselves from certain things. Distraction is a big one. And we get into a bit of denial, right? Now, it must have evolved for some good reason. Everything we have is there for a good reason. But the fact of the matter is, when we live in places in that state for long periods of time, it becomes really self-sabotage. And avoidance of discomfort leads to really unhealthy habits for us. And there's just a little bit of humor around all of that. And what we do know is there is no perfect. So it doesn't matter how long you do any of the practices that help us cope with stress, we're still human. We're still going to fall into these patterns at times and into these perceptual places and places of avoidance that sometimes don't serve our health and our well-being. Well, we do know, though, that there are predictable outcomes for the denial of the stress that we're experiencing through COVID, on top of what were really high pre-existing levels of stress and burnout. And we know that those relate to mental illness, as well as making more mistakes, substance abuse, relationship problems, and diminishing workforce, for example. This is a board that's come out of my current teen group at the clinic. And so I can't even remember what month they generated this, but what we usually do is just kind of do a check-in and see, okay, where are you at? What is causing you stress right now? And I've taken out any identifying information so no child gets in trouble. And then we kind of look at, okay, well, what are the things that help us to manage the stress? As you can see, there's lots of things that they do that we do too, right? Netflix, plagiarize, well, maybe not that one. Cheating, over clean, ghosting. There might be a few, forget to eat, right? And here are some of the stress busters. I really don't know why cheating sometimes is put there. And I think that's why I put a question mark. So maybe I'll change that slide for my next talk. The next set of slides are a little intense, and I will tell you that they are generated from my first teen group, which I formed about 3 years ago. And their group was called Know What I Mean. And it was established to try to gain an understanding of the teenage experience of stress. Because I run stress reduction classes, and every adult that completes them said, I wish I learned these things when I was a kid. And I decided for a year to ask every kid if they could change one thing in their lives, what would it be? And every single kid that came through my office for a year between the ages of 8 and 18 said, I wish my parents were less stressed or depressed. Still chokes me, because that meant my kids too, right? No matter what. So I decided to start the teen stress reduction class so that I could understand teenagers better. I will tell you, there's been no better parenting class for me at all, but they're very intense. So I'm just going to let you know that. But they've generated these memes. The class was called Know What I Meme, and it was a way to translate stress and their experience of stress to parents. Ironically, I've not actually shown this to any of the parents of the teens. They're very protective over the group. It has been presented nationally. So a lot of healthcare providers have seen it, but as you can see, it's pretty heavy. These are pretty big stressors. Some more. As you can see, there's some culturally based expectations and pressures and stressors as well. Full disclosure, this is actually a card I had in my desk. Unfortunately, I just had it there for humor, just to amuse myself every time I open my desk. One time I came out and Anastasia had a card for her teacher at the grammar school. I was like, oh, where'd you get that card, honey? Oh, your desk. I was like, can I see that for a minute, please? That was the card. So needless to say, it's written in, but it's still back under the desk, secured. Here are some more here. My kids suffer as well too, younger children. And they're so apt to laugh. They're so quick to be mindful, to be in the moment and be able to harness that resilience that they do have, but they suffer as well too. And so do parents and family. Just give you a moment just to look. And so do teachers, staff, school administration. It's a lot of stress. The thing I like to say, there's a lot of suffering. That suffering is not a competition. Now that's a darn good thing because there's a lot of it to go around. I talked a little bit about the stress reduction class. I can come back to that later. But again, the more salient part that I wanted to highlight was just that the adults saying they wish they learned it when they were younger, children saying, I wish my parents were less stressed. And then sort of thinking, well, what if we did learn these things when we were younger? The key is we can learn always, right? As long as we're conscious and breathing, we're very lucky to have the ability to learn new. I'll also just remind ourselves, which I don't think we're able to forget right now, that there's a collective suffering that's very, very significant. And of course, all of us, most of us here are in incredibly privileged positions to not necessarily be directly affected by some of these things and others of us not. And once again, just to note it. And our children are very, very aware of these things, and so should they be, right? If they're young enough to, learn about racism, to learn about cultures, they're certainly young enough to also understand what are some of the difficulties and challenges and atrocities associated with that. And what is an age-appropriate way, of course, too. It's heavy stuff, eh? It's heavy. And I just try to put some things, of course, related to Nova Scotia as well, too. And it's a big deal. So there's a lot of suffering right now, a lot of contributing to our stress over and above the pandemic itself as well, too. But the really good news is that we're hardwired to survive, to heal, and to grow. And meaningful change really is possible. I know you're all thinking about my qualifier there, my disclosures, and I am a pathological optimist, but if I had not seen this many times over and over, I would not believe that it's true, but it is true. So what's all about the resilience thing? Well, the thing is, we know that resilience can mitigate some of the long-term effects that stress has on us. And so that's really important, particularly when we're considering the sort of astronomical high levels of stress, burnout, and mental illness that people are experiencing during COVID over and above what we were. So resilience is a component of post-traumatic growth. And I'm just going to talk about that a little bit to start with. It's that ability to bounce back or to recover, what have you, from difficulty or adversity. I guess as far as I'm concerned, we never really bounce back. Like everybody keeps saying, oh, I just can't wait to go back to where it was before. And the reality is that we never will. Like we never remain in the same place. Things always change and we always change. So, that kind of expectation, that's why resilience is somewhat of a limited thing and only a part of the picture. But the reality is that there is the ability for us to actually grow through this, for us to actually be in a place that would far exceed where we'd be had we not experienced it. Now, we all wish that we could get to that place without it, right? Without a pandemic, without all of the stress and all of the like. But the reality is that's not what's happening. And so if we are able to kind of leverage that and we grow personal strength, awareness, we're able to harness our strengths and that kind of growth mindset, which is embedded in that is resilience and optimism and all of these things, then we're able to actually grow and evolve. And I think that's a really important concept for us to embrace and to always think about as well too. Small things make a big difference, right? Each thing in itself is really small, but I kind of think many small things together start to amount to something much more, particularly if you're employed on a very consistent and basis, consistent, persistent, committed. So how do you guys foster resilience in your lives? Open to unmute. I blow bubbles. I take walks. I smell flowers. What do you do?
So I really try to find the silver lining, and sometimes it's a real struggle. But if I can find one positive thing that, in that day or in that week, whatever it was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I find for me, I just need to get out. Like sometimes in the house, it's just too much noise. And you just can't even think, right? You just need to get outside, close the door, and I'm like, okay, I just need a few minutes. Because it's hard to escape the noise, right?
I eat chocolate.
I post a
It's
quote
gonna
of
be
the
my
day.
answer for all of them.
I post a quote of the day every day for the kids to start their day and hopefully try to get me in the right mindset.
Yeah, I know all these little things we think we're doing for them. I'm not sure. I think most of them are to remind myself of those things too, right? And it's kind of interesting how that happens. It's sort of a bi-directional effect. Yeah, I love the Post-it. It's a very good, it's a very, very good coping mechanism. So how do we build resilience? Well, we all know that there's many different ways: making hobbies, using humor, exercise, all of those self-care things we're talking about, strengthening our relationships, finding things that we're passionate about, also having time away from work. Things like practicing gratitude, looking for that one silver lining, as you were saying, that's that thing that we're doing to overcome that negativity bias when I showed you the monkey in the jungle kind of picture. And that's really important. That's part of gratitude as well too, but also of optimism. There are many different things that foster resilience: self-compassion, finding meaning, value, purpose, learning from mistakes. And this is, I took this from, the resilient health professional, but really I kind of realized that it fit everything. The resilient teacher, parent, leader, even student, some facet of there, of course, right? Because maybe for them, it's not about like their workload is their school load. They have time pressures. They have all these things too. In fact, all of these things really actually factor quite strongly into our children's lives too. And the reality is that change is hard. It's also inevitable. It's necessary, and it's a complex, adaptive process. I love when I get to use some of my 40,000 plus pictures in my PowerPoints. That's from the MoMA. Miss the MoMA. The reality is too that quick fixes won't hold and have significant long-term consequences. So that whole tendency that we have to avoid and to deny is very, very significant, because what we can't confront, like what we refuse to actualize or to recognize is real. What we refuse to confront, we cannot challenge, we cannot change. And so that has very significant long-term consequences. And yes, this is a Band-Aid I found on my wall. My daughter apparently tried to fix the wall with Band-Aid. I like to always say, we've seen how stress can wreak havoc with our brains, go offline, not be able to think, speak, do, act, remember where our keys are. The key is, though, we are able to actually go the other way. So I say mess with your mind rather than having your mind mess with you. So we are able to leverage our ability to learn new and to form new neural pathways by the things that we do. So that's what's really important. And what we do know, and that's what I meant by those small things that we do, but whatever we do repetitively, we get new neuronal pathways. And the more that we do that, Okay, the more that those neurons fire together, the more they wire together. And that's how we get conditioning. That's how we get habits, right? Hard to break ones that have already formed in that way through other reinforcement, but not impossible. And that's a really important thing to remember. We can harness the power, and there's very good science behind the power of resilience, optimism, relationships, and neuroplasticity. You know, that we once conceptualized that brain could only change and be that sort of impressionable when we were children, but it's not true. All through our lives, we can. We can nurture resilience through self-care. And here I've put a couple of examples. It's actually from another talk, but again, talking with friends, eating well, prioritizing, being creative. How do you foster self-care? You're welcome to speak up or contribute if you like.
Eat chocolate.
Lindsay's go-to, eat chocolate. I hope that there's a chocolate at the end of this. So here's artistic pursuits. Part of it for me, why I love this, is this whole conceptualization in medicine of the mind and the body being separate, which of course they aren't, but and there it was. So lovely. I want to draw your attention to this. This was a little tick board to-do list. And the lighter font here is music, exercise, dance, create, meditate, gratitudes, share your feelings or journal. Okay, so that light font on that checklist are all the things that I made my children do and check off in the first wave. And then the dark one, which you can see is all chores, in the second wave. I thought it was so funny that I thought I had to share that. I was like, okay, people, we've ridden that wave. That wave has calmed now. That storm has gone. Now it's time to do chores too. But again, it's to understand those are life skills, as are gratitude, as is music, as is creating, journaling, expressing. And there's also the reality of those life skills that we need to clean and cook and do all of those. Establishing some routine, right? Humans, we thrive on routine and rituals. So Anastasia put this on her door, a little book of goals, and there were some rules as well too, maybe a few more than that. We're embracing the natural leaders. A school, an institution, a home, a relationship is really only as functional and happy as the people that live, work, and love within it. So it's really important to remember that self-care is not self-indulgent, that it's self-respect. But I think it's kind of interesting because in many facets now we see self-care, like you should be self-caring more, particularly as women. You know, it's almost become like another thing to put on the to-do list, or another thing that you're kind of chastised for not doing. And I think that's really unfortunate, actually, that it's been placed that way, because, you know, as we said, we all generated ideas, whether it's chocolate or going outside, you know, that we know how to self-care. This isn't something we need to be taught to do, but it is something we need to be supported in. And so why I say that and why I put that in there is because the pandemic has disproportionately affected women and professional women, as well as other groups, of course, which we'll speak about. And I think part of the thing is just realizing that self-care is not an indulgence, particularly if we're talking, you know, many professional women here tonight too. But these things need to be systemically supported. And that goes for the teachers and the administration at school as well too, right? And it goes as well for our children, right? We never say to our child, oh my God, you ate this morning, you don't need to eat now, skip that meal. You know, oh, you slept well last week, you don't need to sleep well this week. And then what do we do when we're stressed, right? We try to do more, get on top of it. We never do that to someone else. So just realizing that. Resilience through mindfulness. So basically anything that you can commodify in our society is commodified. And so it's mindfulness. And in that, there's the unfortunate circumstance that it's kind of lost its meaning, or it's been kind of diluted, but it is actually, you know, pretty significant. And it's significant in so much as to understand that it's, you know, it's really a very simple yet difficult practice. And yet we've all began life this way, this way of being able to be present, to be in the moment. Sorry about that. I don't know how to turn that off. It's one of the teenagers. And it's to be present without trying to judge ourselves and without trying to change it. How easy is that? right? We are always trying to change our experience. And so much of our stress comes from resisting what is. Like the number of times I've heard, I just wish this wasn't happening. And no amount of that actually is going to help us. But it's really actually very important because we know that mindfulness and cultivating this kind of practice really helps us learn. And it's the core of knowing how to be able to tune in to what we need, right? No doctor, no Google Scholar, no nothing can tell us what we know. And yet we're very disconnected from the experience of ourselves to be able to know what we feel, what we're experiencing physically, what we think. And in fact, that's how we also secure our care. So it's really critical that we foster and cultivate mindfulness. It's more than we can go through in this talk, but these are the pillars of mindfulness. And yes, I do have this as a poster over the toilet to remind my children we have the capacity to let it go. I use a little humor with my stickies. But we also know that we foster resilience through meditation. Now, meditation and mindfulness are not the same thing. Meditation can be a type of mindfulness practice. But why do I like it? Well, I like it because it's cheap. Doesn't cost us anything. It's equitable. Everyone can do it as long as you're conscious and breathing. It's not weather dependent, which is extremely important if you live in Nova Scotia. And as little as 10 minutes a day or 20 minutes 3 times a week is enough to actually foster the changes in the brain that are actually conducive to being able to settle the mind and to settle and the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system that gets activated during our stress responses. So we know that it very much helps. And it actually, these practices repetitively actually increase the size of the prefrontal cortex while simultaneously shrinking the amygdala here, which is responsible for that old brain that we were talking about. We also can foster resilience through value, meaning, and purpose. So it's important to kind of look at, well, we spend a lot of time thinking about our stress and why we're distressed, but how much time do we spend thinking about what's the value behind it? There's a reason why it's causing us that much stress. So being able to connect to what value it is what helps us be able to start to understand why it's that important to us and maybe look at it in a different way from a different perspective. Perhaps the most important thing is that we start just sort of conceptualizing, more so, how we're going to get through this, but what do we value? Like, who do we want to be, right? We're going to make so many mistakes, and that's as if we haven't already made them. I've made tons of mistakes through this pandemic. Might have been buying giant things of Nutella or, trying to pack a whole bunch of work in just because you could and you're at home and get on top of it because then you could have a full weekend and, but the reality is it's more really about who we want to be. Like, what do we want it to be? What do we want our kids? What do we want to feel like we came out of it? What's it about for us? And I will just remark that this is always a choice, but we're particularly privileged to be able to be in a position of thinking a little bit of having more time and space and perhaps financial stability, food security and all the things that confer us that privilege and luxury about being able to think about how we think, which it is, and to be able to think about how we want to face the challenge. It's always a choice, regardless of our position in society, but we're particularly advantaged to do that. And we should make sure that we do take time to think about what it is that we want. Even when we err, we make mistakes, what will more come out of this to the people that we live with or we work with is what was it about? Like, how did we show up for it? What did it mean? We do create resilience through meaning and through compassion. I will also often refer to compassion as the antidote for burnout. And we do know that it has incredibly strong evidence for its positive health effects, both on our mental and our physical health. I won't go extensively through that just on account of time. We also benefit from doing non-random acts of kindness and gratitude. So doing good for other people really benefits us. We actually know that compassion creates emotional, physical responses that we experience as pleasant and positive, and that the neuroimaging studies that we have access to have shown that the pleasure centers in the brain become activated when we see someone give even, and actually similarly when we receive. And surprisingly, we will experience more pleasure and happiness when we are giving than when we're receiving. Even as young as 2, and toddlers will participate in pro-social helping behaviors. And I don't know why that hasn't hit the parenting literature enough, because that's really old school news. This is Masa Madalif. When we were quarantined, they put drawings on the sidewalk. These are my kids visiting my parents. This was a card we made for Mary on the sidewalk. So she has the house that has a little the little outdoor library right by the school, and there's a bus stop. She knits hats and she puts them in there for people. And she puts food in there too, and little stuffies. And so we decided one day we would make her a card. This is my current teen group, and we make hygiene packs as like little relief packs. And it's very important, particularly because typically these groups are quite heterogeneous. This group is quite homogeneous, quite a few grammar kids there. You know, lots of kids are worrying about their next pair of Jordans. They forget that sometimes people don't have soap. One of my patients shared as a principal of the school in a more marginalized community that kids in their school were sharing toothbrushes sometimes with siblings. So that was the impetus to start putting together these packs and working on projects like this so we could perspective take, empathize, and really also reap the benefits of what it is to intentionally do good for others. Resilience through optimism. And we often think of optimism as being an inborn trait, right? I think I was kind of born pathologically optimist, but we can ask that of my parents later. However, you know, it is possible to cultivate that. We know that the psychologist Martin Seligman has done extensive research. He's also coined the term learned helplessness. He knows that there's learned optimism. And he's looked at the fact that people who are optimistic tend to have really significant health benefits. And it probably has to do with the fact that they engage in healthier behaviors, as well as has stronger support networks. And by virtue of that, probably have less circulating stress hormones or stress responses. We also foster optimism and resilience through the gratitude. So, you know, examining our beliefs and our cognitive distortions or our perceptual things, writing down what we're grateful for, 3 things a day, and they can't repeat, because I'll tell you, my kids put it on autopilot. Gotta leave it to my kids. And working together to do a kind deed. It's really also professionally linked to career success, and as well as incredible levels of productivity within the workplace. So it's amazing that hasn't kind of hit the, I guess what it would be, industrial or working literature more so, because it really is important. And right now we're struggling to hold on to optimism and that silver lining. Resilience is cultivated through communication. And if you think about, so much of our language reflects so many things about how we think about change and stress and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, sticks or stones or hurtles, but words are not true. That's bullshit. We know that's not true. Words do hurt. Words are meaningful. And it's really, really problematic because not only are words expressive, they're generative. So as we use them, they express how we feel. We similarly have an effect on the people around us. But also when we hear ourselves say something a certain way, it then is a feedback loop and it generates a certain feeling and accompanying physical and cognitive responses in relation to that. So the words that we use are really, really important. It's important that we use positive, wise speech, that we learn how to not judge ourselves, not lash out, not lash in, so that we can really look at how it is that we're communicating, what we're communicating, because it does hurt. It hurts ourselves and it hurts other people. And we know that it really affects our cognitive, emotional, and physical well-being as well too. There's lots of different strategies and lots of ways that we can learn how to communicate to foster a healthier sense of communication, but also stronger relationships too. This is just like a little format that we use at the end of my stress reduction classes to learn how to communicate in that way. We know that our strongest drive is to belong and connect. And so that resilience is fostered through feeling and connection. And it's very important that we consider that we consider how it is we live and how we can kind of cultivate more of a sense of community and connection. I mean, ironically, many of the things that we're facing right now are because we've so much, I guess, embraced individualism, right? And then we wonder why somebody can be like, oh, well, that doesn't really affect me, and have a party and not really worry about how someone else feels. I mean, we've cultivated some of this, not to absolve people of their individual choices and responsibilities, but part of it is that we don't live in community anymore. And that's really difficult because we know that there's compelling evidence to show that feeling connected leads to a more meaningful life, to more altruism, empathy, compassion. We live a better quality of life as well as a healthier life. We live a life feeling supported, and it's incredibly important. It's partly what helps confer our survival and our well-being. particularly now, I think we see that mirrored. Oh, here's some more communication things. I think that's out of order, but that's okay. We also foster resilience through connection to nature. My dad is right. The forest will make you happy. Any part. And we're so lucky in Nova Scotia. It takes so little time to go somewhere very, very beautiful. And we're very lucky to make use of that. And there's nothing more powerful than to pop you through that sensory experience of being in nature into a mindful state of just being present and at peace and helping to quiet that autonomic nervous system that gets activated with stress. One of the most important things that we can consider when we think of that growth mindset also is about resilience through failure and just reminding ourselves that we're not perfect. That's probably one of the larger things that we suffer with, is this idea of perfectionism, idealism, right? Instead of reality. That's the majority. Like, pain is inevitably part of life, but suffering comes when reality doesn't meet ideals or perfections. And if you ask me if I'm a perfectionist, I'd say, no, come on, guys, look at my house. No, not a perfectionist. If you ask me if I'm an idealist, I'm like, oh, guilty. It's the same thing. And we'll fight it. We'll continue to fight it. It's okay. That's why we call it practice, right? But I think what's really important is just understanding that that these aren't failures. You know, these are really opportunities. It's a crisatunity, as one of my colleagues calls it, and it's an opportunity to learn, adapt, and change and evolve. And that's a basis of the scientific method. So it's always funny to me that particularly in medicine, also we tend to focus on failures and have all kinds of biases towards things that have positive outcomes. We also sometimes need resilience through therapy. Sometimes we rely on our children too much. They're not our parents, they're not our partners, they're not our therapists. The fact that they say the single thing that would make their lives better is that parents to be less stressed calls for the need of this. And yes, Lindsay will give out her card, and anyone's welcome to my group. I know, how do you like that, Lindsay? She's also giving out chocolate. Anyway, just again, I think it's really important because the culture, well, certainly the culture of medicine, and I think the culture of perfectionism, many parts of our culture have created kind of a toxicity to the expression of struggle, stigma around mental illness. And this creates further barriers to accessing care, both for all of us as adults, but also for children. And we can't afford to do that. We have really high rates. I think we have, after accidents, suicide is the highest rate in children for cause of death. That's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And, you know, this continual denial and this fear of the stigma associated with mental illness is really confining. Children can't even choose to go to the doctor on their own, right, until they're a certain age. We are the gatekeepers to that. So it's really important that we consider talking about this. I don't care if I do appreciate that my kids talk to me about things, but they need to be talking to some adult and processing some of what is the difficulty of living in this society, in this life with someone. And what I might say, taking away from all of this, is that, you know, in terms of honoring our sense of our social sense, as being a social organ, our strongest drive is to belong and connect, is that what's really different is the quality of living when we have a sense of living with people, not for them, right? That we be with our family rather than be for them. And it's a very qualitatively, a very different experience of parenting, of teaching, of caring, of any kind of experience. And I think on the other side too. And if we kind of honor the role of relationships, then we have this great potential to really cultivate a stronger society and be healthier ourselves as well as for our children. I'm not going to go further into that. There's just some spewing of preaching to the converted here. But anyway, I made a little option A, B, C, D, and then F, doing nothing. So just to show you some lived experience of it, this is how we do A in my house. This is what humor looks like. Yeah, so that's having humor, creativity, inclusiveness. So we do, when we're allowed, we let the neighbors' kids come too. Okay, this would be a text message to go, Sasha, did you get into my wine? She's like, no, I didn't. Looks like you did to me. Because I found this app that I could make these pictures. So great. This is my funny face. It's under the couch at work, so I can really embarrass my children. This was my outfit, jogging pants. I actually changed my pants just in case one of you asked to see my bottom and made sure I wasn't dressed from this part up. But anyway, and I said, oh my God, my clothes seem worthless now. So Anastasia did a fashion show. We said, and she put on my dresses, actually. Big trouble. This was exercise class, phys ed one day. They said we could go outside. So I went out and danced. Kai skipped. Anastasia then went inside because apparently she doesn't think having a weird mom builds character just yet, but she'll get there. What kinds of things do you guys do to have humor, creativity, and light? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, we do dance parties. We put Blair on the music. I have 2 little ones, 2 and 7, so that always amuses them, and it just gives me a break too. You kind of forget, right? You don't really ever take the time to do that, and then you kind of get into it, you know. It's fun and it helps, and you just you see them just smile and laugh and enjoy it, and it's all worth it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you've got music, it doesn't even feel like exercise sometimes. What else do people do? What do you do to have creativity, light, movement, humor? Can't say chocolate, Lindsay. You have to say something else.
That's what I was gonna say though.
Make chocolate, cook the chocolate.
Make
Chocolate.
chocolate. Yeah, I know.
Paint with chocolate. I'm seeing a whole new paint night. I'm seeing this, right?
That'd be very wasteful of chocolate though.
Option B, when all else fails, Google it, but use good sources because you're going to see some stuff you don't want to see, and definitely that you do not want your children to see. Note to self: sometimes your gadgets will communicate to your iPad, and your children will see pictures they shouldn't see from your professional life, and that's how you ruin future doctors. Okay, option C, remember to learn from those who have endured before us. Option D, skip from all above and just ask the kids what to do. My dad will always say we should give kids the vote. You know what? Actually, they have brilliant ideas. I've often been really humbled by children, even of limited intellect, who I've asked their opinion on some particularly difficult thing in their lives in the office, and I've been really humbled at what solutions they were able to come up with. And option F, of course, is a fail, do nothing. Option C is just to come and rely on the wisdom of people who have endured great struggle before us, and that we have a great deal of respect and ability to learn from. And to also understand what it takes to be resilient and to grow and to maintain that kind of optimism in the face of all this. And I think, you know, it's important that we acknowledge that we all have a role and a responsibility in engaging a system and contributing to a community and society that also acknowledges the shortcomings of our society and of our history, of our institutions, and really trying to embrace all of that with a sense of openness and vulnerability, of, you know, creating space that's emotionally and otherwise safe for people to be able to express, and also speaking up so that we can create change in places and ways that are perhaps very uncomfortable for us to do, acknowledging that in many ways we've also been part of what are some of the unconscious biases that have formed the institutions that we all belong to as well too. And this is how we also help create a healthier society and more equity. We need to feel it to deal and to heal. So I'd say that, you know, really just holding our pain makes us healthiest parents, healthier students, teachers, leaders, caregivers, human beings. And that when we're able to share like everything, our failures, our imperfections, our joys, our celebrations, that's really what connects us on a deeper level than Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. And, you know, holding that shared sense of humanity is really what's going to help us to persevere, to grow, evolve, and thrive, and also to heal from things. And that's our shared humanity. I always go back to Darwin, and because he's just smart. And he said, you know, again, it was those who are most responsive to change. Remembering that change is so hard for us. And remembering that change under threat, of which is COVID, and then also all of the things that are, you know, the constraints of the systems that we all work and live in, and the limitations also create threat. People and places do not work well under threat. We just don't. And, you know, we often will quote Darwin as saying survival of the fittest, but in reality, he more talked about communities that were actually survival of the kindest, if you want to take it in my boiled down pathological optimistic way. But really, he did talk about those that who collaborated and improvised were the ones that survived and flourished, ones where there were more maternal bonds and things like this. So it's just to remember that we can contribute towards creating a new culture and a stronger society by working together, being compassionate, collaborative, communicating, and in creating community. I will leave you with my top 10 tips. I will give you a reference at the end to an article I wrote on this. That was for the first wave. I do think there's a second wave that's required. And I won't go through it, but there's a reference if you'd like to go to the article in the Canadian Family Physician on that. And also I will end on what was a board. You see, also make use of those 40,000 plus pictures I always take. But this is a board from a school that I took a picture of because I thought it was really funny. And I want you to look carefully at the needs and wants. I think it was grade 1. Because if you look under needs and wants, it was so funny to me. I had to find this picture, right? Kids know what they need. They know what's a want. We just have to really get that straight too, and remember that it might take more effort. It might mean we need to override our stress response to make space, to really be with our children so that we can actually give them the love and the care that they need. But I just do want to draw your attention, in case you didn't notice it, that toilet
paper
that wants, which I think is the funniest thing ever. It's why I took a picture of it. And lo and behold, why that would be so important during a pandemic, because remember how it was all out of the stores and everything. So I thought that was quite hilarious and a good thing to end on. We'll make the slides available, of course. Everybody, you're welcome to attend my stress reduction classes. They're covered on MSI. There are lots of different kinds of groups. There's a Joy Of series where you can do a half-hour of yoga through a very skilled practitioner who really, really works as well. And then a meditation, we have guided journaling, so many different ways to be able to de-stress in very short periods of time through the week. And those are all available to everyone or anyone as well too. And there's some more resources there, and certainly I'm happy to provide some more later, but we should just keep it on because it's fun. Yeah. Well, I guess I didn't leave much time for questions, but if people wanted to ask questions, you're welcome to do so, or if you had any comments or anything you wanted to talk about, please unmute yourselves.
Maria, that was wonderful. I just want to make sure, in case anyone else is wondering, will you send me the PowerPoint so I can send out to everyone?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And then all the resources as well.
I'm happy to do that too. And
we can also.
I didn't really spend much time on the resource. I will make sure that I do put some there because I do think it's important for people to have access. Excuse me, and it's not really that easy to figure out. And in a resource limited system, it's actually particularly harder. And I think that, to be honest with you, I think that's why we really need to also consider things that are from the ground up, community-based strategies, and our community in the school, our communities we live in, because there are such limited professional resources for the burden of emotional burden and the sort of mental health burden in the system for children and adults. So during this pandemic, so really just trying all of these things and trying to do the best we can, each of us individually and collectively, to help cultivate efforts towards fostering these practices for kids and for everyone around us, I guess.
I think
we don't have any questions.
We either need to invite Maria back next year to do the talk again, because it's very unfortunate that it fell on like a heat wave evening in June. You're competing with the fact that everybody's been locked up and have just been allowed to sort of enter communities and exit communities again. And I feel like when I think of the ACEs talks that we have across the schools, I feel like this would be very well received. So whether we borrow your recording or we borrow you again, I might be able to twist your arm.
Yeah, oh no, I'm happy to talk about it actually. So I do specifically an ACEs talk and a talk on trauma-informed care and trauma-informed schools. There is a chapter as well on that in Mindfulness for Schools. It's a book that's distributed through the Maritimes and the school system. Yeah, but yeah, happy to talk about that too, because of course this is another one of those ACEs. But, yeah. Any other questions? Any comments from the parental peanut gallery?
I would like to say thank you for coordinating this. I'm one of those parents. We actually live in Truro. So my son is new to the school this year, and I have been driving him to grammar from Truro every day. So I'm probably the only person not upset that they had to stay home for a few weeks, because I was like, oh, thank God.
You got to sleep in a little bit, and I only live around the corner. I was happy.
No, I thought it was a great talk. I think it's one of those things, like every year at the beginning of the school year, we could all benefit from a reminder of all these tips and reminders. Self-care is not something I'm really good at. I'm really good at encouraging other people. I'm not so good at for me, but I really enjoyed this, and especially because we don't live in Halifax, I like the virtual opportunities to pop in and do these types of activities. It is more convenient for people. They're at home. So again, it was a nice, beautiful, hot day. So yeah, certainly that's going to entice people to be out on the deck. But I really appreciate those that coordinated. I thought the information was great. So thank you to everybody.
And thank you for attending. And respect, I'm going to have to change that slide to, driving the kids to soccer to driving from Truro to grammar.
Yeah.
There was a few nights in the winter that I was parked outside of random schools waiting for him to finish basketball because I wasn't allowed to go in. So I was like, yay, you made the junior varsity team. I'm really happy for you. As I sat and drank tea for like 2 hours outside of a school. I had no idea where I was.
Oh, goodness.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Andrea, we're going to get you involved in some pack activities. So you'll have your own activities to do.
Right?
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell you exactly how to glue the tissue paper onto the jar, and you have to follow her instructions.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Maria and I can't do crafts together. We don't play well together, actually. We've learned that.
Oh, we do well. I think you were in there. Were you in there? I had this slide of your cell phone.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, I did.
A slide of my cell phone.
I do. I'm going to put it up just because you said.
God. Really?
Yeah, I am.
I'm a little concerned. I don't remember.
Here it is. I don't know. I'm pushing on it. It's not going to it, but.
Oh. Yeah, no, I'm not seeing whatever you do.
No, it's funny. It's wigging out a bit, but I can see it.
You can see it. We can't see it. Okay.
So I'll have to stop the share. Technical difficulty.
I was going to say, I was watching really closely.
You had texted me with a little emoji. I was so impressed with your tech skills, and it looked like you, and it was like the crime.
Oh, that. Yeah.
It's in there. I don't know why it didn't come out properly. I can see it. You guys can't.
Too funny.
Anybody have any questions or anything specific that anyone wanted to ask? Or hi, Vanessa. Thanks for.
Can I ask a quick question? So my question is, so I love the idea about getting sort of meaning and the idea about like altruism and sort of about being able to make connections and relationships. I think with kids, I think the challenging thing is I don't have family. We don't have that around here. And I don't think that I could be enthusiastic enough about like, wouldn't it be so fun to go help people, blah, 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 blah. Like when it comes to sort of bringing on or recommending these activities or trying to get your children to participate in them, how important is it to try and get their like enthusiastic buy-in?
Well, I would say actually that it's not. It's stronger. No, I'm not kidding. Actually, I think it is a stronger and a more resonating experience if you have buy-in. But what I've learned through experientially and professionally is that you don't necessarily have to want to do something to do it. And if you do it repetitively, you start to resonate with the experience. So it's sort of like almost like they can buy in as they go through it, So, there's some, how would I just explain this? I have a really good OPA story because I'm very clumsy and I always drop everything and I break dishes. So I only buy white dishes and everyone thinks it's the kids, but it's really me, because then you replace them and no one knows, right? You broke them or whatever. Right? But it was actually a much bigger story about how I was kind of like not really, I was very goofy, not really good at anything, or not very organized. It was this really awful story. And in fact, I used to always say, okay, when my kids, make these mistakes, I'm not going to get mad at them. I'm just going to say it's an accident. We'll just tidy that up. It wasn't my experience growing up, which was just a cultural norm. And so one day my son dropped a bottle of olive oil in the kitchen. He was about 8, and he said, "I'm such an idiot." I was like, oh my God, why did he say that? I've never said that to him. And what I realized through that was all of a sudden there's the mirror. And I realized that I hadn't stopped saying it to myself, right? Even though I treated them differently. And so kids don't do what we say, they do what we do. However, two-pronged lesson in this is that I decided in that moment, because I actually really authentically felt the pain of what it was to call myself to lash in like that every time I did something wrong. And I built the story to something much bigger than just clumsiness, for sure. That would be the mindful moment that I put the coffee cup on the top of the car and drive away just before teaching mindfulness class. Yeah, no comments from the peanut gallery. And, I built it up to be a really, really big deal. And so I decided I wanted to change it. So I said, every time I say idiot, I was going to say something funny. And because I'm half Greek, and that saying OPA involves breaking dishes in a happy way, I would say OPA. So every time, because I said I was goofy, that I dropped something, I'd be like, oh, I'm such an idiot, OPA. And it was really not heartfelt. It was very mechanical, like just say the thing, you're committed to this, you're changing this. Took 3 months till I stopped saying idiot, and I just said OPA, but I didn't feel it. After another 3 months, I started to feel it. And honestly, after about just under a year and a half, something would break and I'd laugh and I'd say OPA. So that was a very difficult learning. There's definitely things synapse and they resonate and we learn them stronger when there is buy-in, but it doesn't have to be. You just have to keep persisting at it because you want it and you're committed to something else. And perhaps probably the more defining moment for me that had been successful, other than me not saying it and experiencing it in a positive way, was a dish breaking across the street or something. Someone broke something across the street from us and one of my kids went, "Opa." Right. I was able to change it for them too, so we're able to do that. Of course, I tell this story like every class I teach. There are a few other details in it, but I've left them out of this storytelling this time. And the funny thing is, I thought I got too complacent. Now I really like my story. I like the story of how I'm clumsy and I break everything and I have this really good reason. It's a good excuse now. So I decided maybe I have gotten complacent. I should question that. I made a box. I put it on top of the washing machine. And every time I broke something, I put it in there. My husband's like, well, just that thing. I was like, oh, it's an art project. I'm doing a mosaic. Like everything has to just be an art project, right? But what was so interesting is looking after the month at that box, I could not believe how much I broke. It was unbelievable. Really, it was unbelievable. And since that day, just because of intentionally creating that practice and looking just out of curiosity, just to question it, I've hardly broken anything in comparison to that. Isn't that interesting? So that's how mindfulness, that's how self-awareness can really help us cultivate new ways of experiencing ourselves and our lives. And I know that's a small example, but those translate into much bigger things that we're able to do in our lives too. So I think you got to just live it, even if there isn't buy-in for you. And we know, I think even at grammar, that there's like non-voluntary, voluntary stuff that I do. And we know that even though we want it to come from some altruistic place, which is a whole other more philosophical conversation from someone who studied empathy and child development, but we know that they still reap the benefits of that. And I think a lot of it is about perspective taking. It's about compassion, empathy, imagining being in someone else's shoes. And we know that there still are benefits, which is why it's kind of like mandated voluntary activities that they do have. So, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
There can also be small things that you incorporate, right? Like that card that we made for Mary, it's just a solitary small thing that we did. And it was just a lovely moment, right? They can be small things that we also work in. And I think the other thing is I think one of the things is it's sometimes very easy to do for other people that we don't know, to also just look at our families and kind of consider, well, wait a minute, also, what can we do for our grandparents? What can we do for our families, or whatever, at our neighbors? Because we look far and we look at sort of larger, institutions or other organizations that are requiring that, but like it's all around us. And sometimes we forget that too. And that's really important. So I don't think you have to look so far. Yeah.
That's good advice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else is welcome to contribute to advice too. Or questions.
Any other questions or comments or? Maria, I just wanted to thank you so much for meeting with Jacqueline and I a couple weeks ago. I told her you were awesome, and after we got off the Zoom, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I love her." And I said, "I know, right?" And it's one of those nights, and I just wish more people would have could have come out. I wish it was rainy.
Oh,
but, thank you.
You don't have to worry about consoling me for that. I was happy to do the talk, and I figured it would happen. Actually, why I asked you to record it, so that if you wanted to, you could, distribute to other people that want to watch it on a rainy day, if they so choose to do so. But I'm always happy to do these talks, and I actually just really believe that, change happens one interaction at a time, one human exchange at a time. So even if one person just showed up tonight, I was happy. Because I think that's how we start to shift and change culture in small incremental bits. So yeah.
Well, there's just so many.
Just my mom and dad, I might have been a little bit bothered, but
there's just so many great takeaways. I know that myself, I'm just going to be more mindful, especially with having young kids, in terms of how I, treat myself as your example, because you don't think about that until they're expressing. Right, and you look back in that mirror. So I'm going to make a point of being more mindful of that as well. But I hope that maybe we can do this again, back in in September, and maybe it's in person and virtual, to allow more people to come. But it's one of those things that, like you said, that fourth wave, something that we still need to continue talking about and addressing. And more so when we're back in school again, right? And adjustments and changes and all that. So so look forward to that.
That actually brings up one really good point that I wouldn't mind just leaving me with, I think, actually, because oftentimes people, when they're having less difficult a time, won't seek out care actually. So like the weather will be good and everyone's feeling good as compared to like a month ago. And people will tend to not seek out care at that time. They're like, but I'm feeling better now. The thing is, we actually learn better in that state. Remember that picture of the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and everything. So actually, that's so unfortunate, right? Because we can actually learn the skills, we can actually process with more resilience and more capacity to sit with discomfort and to go deeper. So I always encourage people, actually, that's the best time to seek it out. I mean, and it's the equivalent, metaphorically speaking, of saying, like, let's say a kid's like having a, temper tantrum, and you're like, oh, breathe, just breathe. They're not going to learn to breathe in that moment. Right. So it's kind of the equivalent of that. Like if you actually teach them in a non-stress state how to do that breath, and they learn then that moment when they're panicking or tantruming and they ask them to do that miracle breath with you, then they actually got it. And it's similar. So, I really believe in emotional support and psychological care. I really think that it's just the same thing as other preventative care that we do. And I would say that we should be engaging these things even when the weather is nice, no matter what wave we're riding. And if it's quieter and sunnier, that's even better. We just take it in and we can do more, and that will serve us always and our children. And I guess I would also say is that we often feel like our kids should tell us things and be sharing with all of us. I think it's just really important that children, and this again is where we can more cultivate caring for kids as a community, is that it's just really important for children to have positive adult role models that they can also share their emotional world with, particularly these days, because they have a whole other life separate than us, our children.
Very true. Well said.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all so much for
Maria.
joining.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ah, it's a physics teacher. I know who you are.
He's probably busy marking. Are you marking, Fredo?
I am marking. I'm
that's
procrastinating. It's
love
part of
it.
our resilience. Thank you so much, Maria.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Just responsible. If my kid wants to go to Mars, I'm going to be really mad at him. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.